call this meeting to order. First item on the agenda is public participation, but seeing nobody in the audience, we'll move right past that.
I noticed there's a dog park committee meeting downstairs, which explains why we're empty up here.
I thought you were going to say there was, I thought you were going to say there was a dog in the audience. Which
I resemble that.
All right, second item on the agenda is discussion of municipal FY19 budgets. So there's about 3 things I want to hear from you on, and I want to hear from everybody. The first is just your overall impression of Budget Saturday, how it went. Since there's many new members on the committee, what you thought of the format, things like that. So I'll start with Tom, because he's at the end of the table.
I liked it quite a bit, actually. When I was on the committee many years ago, we didn't have such a thing. Instead, we would all divide up and take different budgets that we'd be responsible for. So I would meet with the chief of police, the fire chief, things like that, go through their budgets, and then come back and report out to the committee. So I thought this was a much better, more efficient way of doing it. You got to hear everything in totality. For me, it was a good chance to meet a lot of the department heads as well. I guess the one thing I was a bit surprised about, I think almost in the entire discussion, was not around spending. It was more around qualitative things and understanding how things are done, maybe without really talking about the actual budget. There was very little conversation about the dollars. That said, there really wasn't much that needed discussion. If there was, I think there would have been more.
Yeah, so it tends to go with this year didn't have a lot of departments,
right?
You know.
Yeah. No, so I liked it.
Okay. Christine.
I thought it was very interesting. For me, I approached it as much as a way to learn about what's coming, figuring it's a multi-year process of understanding what needs to be developed over time in terms of spending, what the views of the different departments are in terms of range of where they're going. I was very appreciative that they responded to all of my very detailed questions about various things and thought it was.
Yeah, somebody must like you. For the first time I was on this committee, I didn't get any responses to it.
Well, I feel good about it, thank you.
But that was under a different management. Christine?
I thought it was great. I learned a lot. I agree that it was more, this is how things happen and why things happen, but not so much on overall of how the budget kind of interworks with each other. Because everything was segmented, so it was hard to look at the budget then and say, you know, where can we save, where can we find, you know. Anyway, the coffee was terrible, but the sandwiches were fantastic.
Take a note of that. Jason?
Morning coffee, what do you think of the morning coffee?
It was gross.
Okay, I thought this year was nowhere near as contentious as years past. I thought this was a lot smoother, a lot kinder. There were a lot less pointed barbs from all sides this year, in my opinion. So I thought that was interesting. Definitely do appreciate the opportunity to ask questions of every single department. I think that's a really fantastic opportunity that we get, and I'm glad to see it keep going on. So without Doug going after the nursing and without Margaret going after transportation, I thought things were
We don't have to name names of former members. Yeah, I'll come back to you, Roland. Mike, you've been through a few of these.
Yeah, I thought it was well organized. I think what made it non-controversial is that they're all dealing with sort of level funding. Lunch was good. Coffee at least didn't run out. So that aspect of it was good. All the presenters, I think, were well prepared. They knew their budgets. They were prepared to answer any kind of detail that was in or not included in their budget. The only document I would have liked to see, and we ask for it every year in one form or another, is maybe a one-page head count by, that would sort of tie into their budgets by department, maybe professional versus and part-time, or whatever the total head count is for the town. Just, it'd be nice to know that number.
Yeah, we did make that request, and we had not seen it yet. But yeah, every year we make the request, and every year it shows up eventually. John?
Yeah. I just continue to be impressed by how decent, hardworking, and caring our professional staff is, and how they really have a budget process where they have this, they go to the Hill and they have weekly meetings and they really pare it down. And they came in with a 2.5% general increase and 3% total with the capital costs, and right in line with what we requested.
Bob, you've been to many, many of these.
Had you known they were going to do that, we'd ask for all of them.
Yes, I have been to many, many of these. I was a bit surprised, even though two former members were no longer with us, that there was no discussion of whether the nursing service was actually making money after all of these years of promoting how they were going to get out there and beat the bushes to develop a market.
I withheld my tongue on that one. No, it is not, and I chose not to make the comment.
The total subsidy of transportation, because they've I don't want to say hidden, but they've separated Crosstown Connect from the other kinds of buses. We have no idea as a total how much it is that we're subsidizing. Are we subsidizing more? Are we subsidizing less? What's the average cost? They keep talking about the number of rides, but most people ride two ways, so you have to divide the number in half to get individuals who are served. I think that could have been better. I'm glad Christy was satisfied with the answers she got back. I thought that they brushed off many of those by saying, it's all taken care of, it's all taken care of. I had the same feeling about my concerns that they're underspending on salaries, and yet the budgets keep rising. One doesn't know enough to look at the bottom line and not at the subparts, and I still think that there's a proper scrubbing of those budgets would release some money. My greatest disappointment was with the North Acton Fire Station. We are roughly 6 weeks, 7 weeks away from town meeting. We have no idea how big a station they want to build. We have no idea how many trucks they want to put in there. We have no idea how they want to man it. They say that they can do it with the current trucks and manpower, and in fact they can, but it was immediately, you get the impression that a year after the thing is built, and they operate it with 2 men up there, or 2 firefighters, I should say, certainly they're going to need more firefighters and they're going to need more equipment, although this is a very rich equipment department compared to most of our suburban counterparts. If I reflect back on the schools and the amount of detailed information about what their ultimate goal was that went to the special town meeting, the town is nowhere near prepared to do that at the moment. And frankly, I don't see how anybody from this committee or a citizen could support this idea. Well, we'll spend $750,000 and maybe we'll find out how big a fire station we can build, but we don't know how much we want to put up there. We don't know, and we don't know anything. So I was very disappointed in that.
Okay. Jeff?
I'll start off on a good note. Having been on the committee 40 years ago, there has been a change. I think the committee used to be much more into the details of each department and would ring out and work with department heads, and maybe there was some conflict between the committee's view and the town manager or whatnot. But what it gave up was sitting back from a strategic point of view and having any influence in the grander scheme of things. And it certainly did not have the ALG. So I think between the ALG and Budget Saturday, which is, you know, it's an opportunity for us to pick on details, but quite frankly, you pay a town manager to run their shop, and you really don't need, I don't think it's appropriate for us to get into the great detail of why did they snow blow one street before they snow blow the other, and, you know, really get into all that as much as the impact that the ALG and this committee has had on it, and as well as being able to have a presentation like we saw Saturday. So I was in general very impressed. I did send a note to the town manager, just for me personally, with 3 things that I thought he could improve on. Of course, I copied Mark because he's not going to be around next year. The first is, many of our questions, the answer came back, well, we moved that line item. You know, we're no longer putting that expense in that line, it's going somewhere else. And so there was a lot of confusion between 17, 18, and 19 because they were apples and oranges comparisons. In industry, we have a simple correction for that. We call it restated. And we just restate what the budget would have been in 17 and 18 compared to the budget in 19 if everything had been moved into those accounts the way they are in 19. And I had an opportunity to talk to the town accountant, and we talked about the crystal reports. And I think that could have been done, and it should be done in the future. So if they, you know, move a whole section of accounts to the town manager from some other accounts, then they just go restate what it would look like in the budget for those prior years, so we can have apples to apples across the board. You can even do it for actuals with a little bit of effort, faking out the crystal reports. The second thing, which was more problematic for me, is, you know, I'm a champion for KPIs, key performance indicators. And quite frankly, I like to know that the fire department needs more people because we have this many more runs that we have to do, or we understand that something is going down, like the school committee, if they published their KPIs for, let's say, the elementary school, and we saw that they were coming down 20% a year for the last 10 years, you would then ask the question, well, why would we still be spending as much money on teachers and programming for the elementary schools? And similarly, when it goes up, we have the opposite notion. So there were, not uniformly, but many of the departments had a mission statement, you know, before their budgets, which I thought was kind of good. And they could have put in, I think, a couple of graphs that just shows over the last 3 or 4 years what's going on in their department. What are their goals as it relates to key performance indicators? Is it, somebody asked a question about what's the FBI say we should have police officers per 1,000 citizens, or, you know, whatever the metrics are that that particular department thinks is appropriate, and it would help a layperson who doesn't, you know, need to know all the details, understand what are the drivers of expenses in that department. And the last, I think, was mentioned earlier here. I'm a big proponent of transparency, and by that I mean Transportation Committee. Why don't they have their revenue, their expenses? Maybe this is not part of the budget, maybe this is a supplement, but every department has, what does it cost us to do that department? You know, it could be one number for, you know, some things. And that way, the citizens would know, oh, so we collect a minor amount of money for the senior program, but here's how much it costs us to run the senior program. Once a year for budget meeting, I would take that rent, which has now been put to the town manager's budget because it's more than just senior rent, and allocate it to the various departments. So we would know how much do we spend for our seniors out of our 33 million, or actually 100 million in total. And we'd also know for the nursing, what are we subsidizing? What about for transportation? Having a, quote, loss is not a bad thing for me, but not knowing what the size is, and that's why I asked the question, is in transportation Saturday, is it growing? Can we expect it to be growing? Is it, as we increase volume of ridership, going to stabilize in absolute dollars? And that's okay. We know we're going to have to throw $250,000 a year to subsidize a program which is growing and growing and sharing more rides for more people. So those were my 3 comments that I took away from Saturday.
Roland, have you gotten the drift of what we're looking for?
I thought it went smoother this year than years past. We seem to stick to being on time this year and not running over. Actually, Jen did a great job keeping everybody kind of moving along in the right direction, actually being early. And I think it's great that we can do that. I was satisfied this year with it overall. And I have some points that I agree with Bob that some of the things weren't really answered. One of the questions that Christie asked, they didn't really answer the question. So, I mean, I think there's, that can be improved on going forward. And I agree with some of the things that Jess says, that maybe, we need to look at the transportation and get more of a breakout, if Brian could do that at some point, on a quarterly or biannual basis of what that's costing us to run and what the revenues are, et cetera. Same with the nursing service.
Okay. Brian, would you like to weigh in on any comments, or would you like to talk about the fact that Town Hall was full of people prepaying their taxes the day before Budget Saturday?
Yeah, I could tell you, well, it was obviously quite busy leading up to Budget Saturday, trying to prep for it and all the questions, but also, as we said, we were pretty busy at the collector counter, and that kept us on our toes. But, I mean, I think all in all, I mean, I think it's a fairly good process. I've been doing this for a number of years now, and I think, having as many questions answered, beforehand, I think is a huge help. So anybody that does look through the budget and gives us an opportunity beforehand to answer those and address those. And if there's any questions on what you're actually trying to ask, sometimes we don't always know the question on the fly or understand it or whatever the case, but at least drilling into a little bit more detail. What are you looking for? What are you really trying to find out here? And gives us an opportunity, or more of an opportunity, to drill into it and get more information to you. I always welcome follow-up questions, subsequent to the meeting. Obviously, there's probably more to come. And as you troll through data and as this thing kind of continues to morph, the selectmen still need to adopt a budget, which they'll be doing, I think, sometime next month. So there may be some continual changes or some morphing of this budget. So again, I think questions, I mean, as you're going through this process and stuff's coming up during the course of these meetings, questions on capital, so on and so forth. I think it's critical in getting that stuff answered up front and quickly and not addressed at the last minute, prior to going into town meeting. So the more information, you've got it now, you know what the budget is, you know the capital requests are asking, and I think it's important that, we get rolling on it right now and not waiting, delaying. I think you had a lot of great questions on Saturday. I think even prior to Saturday, I think you had a lot of great questions. I think we try to accommodate any of those, and please, if we have not addressed any of those questions, let us know. As a follow-up, say, hey, Brian, we sent this out. We don't believe we got an answer to it. Please let us know. Because we try to have kind of a check-off list and said, hey, I think we get everything covered. So we do, appreciate, just follow-up. Hey, I didn't get my answer. Okay. We'll get it to you. Roland?
I got one question. I don't know if you can answer this, Brian, or not. That ATV they won for the fire department under the Capitol, do you know what they were asking for? They put it in last year and then they pulled it back. What was the cost last year versus the cost this year? Do you know?
It was 55 last year, and this year was 41.
So they've scaled that request back to a...
He shopped around and tried to look for other deals and try to get a different unit, I believe. And this is, I think, the one he can get the most bang for his buck.
Okay. So what will it cost, Nick? I'm sorry.
27.
All right, next item on the agenda.
Steve?
Yes.
Here's a follow-up. You had created or had created this overview, which is a summary budget by...
I merely asked for it. I know they have it. They just refused to give it to me until I asked for it. It's a ritual we've been going through since 2007, I believe.
No, it's like 6 or 7 lines of salary, 6 or 7 lines of fringe, and then a whole bunch of lines of other kinds of services. I, for one, I liked the overview that the town manager gave, but I would have preferred that after that overview, he have this sheet. And so at a high level, we could ask the question of, salaries are going up 3.9%. So, why, how, if you had a salary plan of 2.5%, but now this is 3.9, and had the discussion about, oh, that's N number of extra people we're adding that we didn't have before, or some of those things. So I think the beauty of this committee is we can be strategic, and the higher level of the discussion to start with, the more strategic we can be.
So personally, what I found in utilizing that is when I go to look at those variances from year to year, having been through Budget Saturday and having the detail, I can now figure out what actually causes those variances. So that's basically why we do it. I think you'll find when we get to the schools, they will have the equivalent of that. It's got a lot more lines, but oftentimes they don't provide quite as much departmental detail. Yeah, so the next thing I want to hear about is exactly that. What questions still are out there looking for answers? And now that you've heard a little bit about some of these things, what do you want to hear more about? Because we have some time and we can bring people in to talk about specific items, like the North Acton Fire Station. Brian, I know in the past you and Steve did 5-year pro formas on transportation, on nursing, on different, items that, certainly we'd like to see those. So getting to Jeff's point, are we making any money? Are we not? We're probably not, but how much? What's the gap? So again, I guess I'll start with Tom. What other things would you like to see, or what information do you need to feel more comfortable about the budget?
I think it's the things that have already been ticked off today, more information on the fire station, the size, and the staffing and supplies for that. Other the enterprise funds, the transportation, the nursing, those budgets where you could see the revenues and the expenses, see it in a more holistic budget for those. And then, as Jeff pointed out, the detail on the expenses where it all pulls in. So nothing new to add. I think those would be my 3 big ones.
Okay. Christy?
I don't know. I'm still trying to get my head around all of this, so I don't have a good answer right now.
Okay, Christine?
Yeah, I guess I'm kind of where Christy is. I'm having trouble. We already voted where we wanted to see the budget this year, and looking at the town budget separate from the school committee budget, and yet it's all going to, affect the same tax rate. It's hard to think of them as 2 separate things when we're trying to get to,
Well, where I'm going with this is, yeah, I would tend to agree that the town budget was very responsive to our point of view, and in the bigger scheme of things, I have no problem with the numbers. That said, I can always have a problem with an individual item, that I think, even though it falls within the guidelines, is it really something we want to do? Is it worth the money? So that's kind of what I'm fishing for. If I need to get, and I do have, at our next meeting, I have representatives from Acton Housing Authority and Acton Community Housing Corporation coming in to just give us an overview of what they do. I'm trying to get Kelly's Corner people in to talk to us, and now that I've seen some of those numbers, I definitely want to talk to them. But, clearly we could benefit from having somebody talk about the fire station, So what I'm going at it after is what items are giving you a little bit of discomfort in what's overall a pretty good budget.
I think I'd like to see where we stand with the capital items that we've said, hey, take the reserves and use it for these one-time capital items. Where do we stand with those? I don't even know, maybe Brian knows. Did they ever do the library roof?
Yes.
See, I know the roof was a big contention last year at town meeting. We know it was a big issue. They had to get taken care of. And I would figure that once that got voted by town meeting, that they would get an RFP on the street for July 1st to get that roof done. And now, we're a year later.
Who was that?
Yeah, I understand, but I mean, that could have been done in conjunction with, the money was already appropriated at town meeting, and that should have been ready to go, in my opinion. I mean, just, it's kind of disheartening. And then, I know there's other things with the fire stations and these other buildings that have to be, things that have to be taken care of, and, well, where do we stand with that? That's what this point, and also, as, again, the fire station, the nursing, those type of things, transportation, et cetera.
Jason?
The one that popped out at me most was Kelly's Corner, spending the money for the streets. I know that was approved and something that we're trying to meet the complete streets, and we're trying to enhance the safety, especially at the crossing there, where all the kids from the school campus are headed over to the Dunkin' Donuts. I understand that that's been approved, but I think it would be, as you pointed out, I would definitely like to know more about what the future plan for that whole redevelopment is before we say we're going to build the streets this way. I definitely don't want to build a plan and spend the money to get schematics and plans and all the rest of that fun stuff, only to turn around and say, well, now we've changed what we're looking on building inside that whole complex. So now we have to rearrange the streets again. That's and I'm very concerned about the Kelly's Corner redevelopment to begin with. Not necessarily a direct budgetary line item that I can point to that I would like more information about. I would love direction from both the Board of Selectmen and the town administration as to what our plan is for 40B. Thank you for scheduling those agenda items for next month, for next meeting. I think now everyone knows where the request came from. And then on the fire department, my question is, are we planning on trying to bring this to the town or to a town meeting in conjunction with the new school building, so that we have something for the school community and something for the municipal community at the same time, so that we can potentially maybe even do just one round of borrowing, or it may not be able to be done since it's two separate entities, but is there any plan on trying to coordinate that together versus just being who's going to rush to town meeting to do the first capital override?
I mean, I think if this, what's in the warrant for this town meeting is, again, a feasibility or a design study, or, so in theory, they'd be on pretty much the same schedule, where
and that's great.
The borrowing would be a year from that. It would not be a combined, the entities borrowing the money would be different. The town would be borrowing for the fire station, the school district for the school. Mike?
Well, almost as a follow-up to I think the last question I asked at Budget Saturday was, what would it take to hold our tax rate flat? Brian said, our assessments would have to be increased, the value of our properties increased, and as Janet said, our level of services would probably decline, which is all true. But I think as part of the budget package, following up on the other idea of KPIs, like each department or group of departments could have key metrics, like a highway department, maintenance, how many miles of roads have been repaved? The recycle, the dump could say, how many tons of trash was recycled, how much steel was recycled, things like that. How many, police department, they said, they made like 32,000 calls, and the fire department had X number of ambulance runs or fires that they addressed, and things like that. So it really would paint a graphical picture of what you get for your $11,000 tax bill. I mean, this is all sort of an explanatory chart of, where your money goes. how many linear feet of sidewalks were installed, things of that nature.
A lot of that information does exist.
Yeah, but it doesn't exist in one place.
True. John?
I think with respect to nursing services and town transportation, we kind of kid ourselves. Good public transportation can't pay for itself through the fare box. I mean, it's got to be subsidized, and what we do here is no exception. I think the important thing with the Crosstown Connect is that it serves underserved communities, particularly seniors who have a hard time getting around, or disabled members of our community. And these are things that government does. And we had a debate at town meeting. Charlie Cadillac was the proponent of maintaining the nursing services because it was such a popular thing. It didn't make any money. It loses money. It requires a slug of taxpayer money, but it goes to an underserved group in the community. And I think it should continue, and I think we really shouldn't be spending a lot of time saying how could they make it more efficient and how can they make it pay for themselves, or how do they narrow the gap. It's not going to happen. That being said, we should, and maybe Janet, if you could perhaps give us an overview now. I had the same reservations Bob had about what was said with regard to the North Acton Fire Station. Are we going forward with that? What's going to happen with the 3 other stations? What repairs are going to be made to bring them up? Those buildings are actually older than the, Gates, Douglas, Conant schools. So.
You don't have to.
I really don't know any more than you do. I mean, the proposal for the North Acton Fire Station is something that we really haven't, the board hasn't discussed, and that's why I asked the question about, okay, you're going to overhaul the HVAC for West Acton and South Acton, so have you considered the long-term plan for those 2 stations? And the answer is really that, well, the stations need good HVAC right now, so and if we phase out, say, West Acton, the building could be used for something else with a good HVAC system in place. But yeah, I think that the whole issue of the fire station, I think originally was supposed to have a committee working on it, and I think the committee never either got appointed and just never did anything, or never got appointed. And we fell way behind on just even getting the idea of a North Acton Fire Station, beyond sort of the very abstract stage. And so this proposal is the first that, I've seen of anything moving on the North Acton Fire Station since we had the presentation analyzing fire safety coverage in the town, which indicated we needed a station in North Acton, and at some point down the line could phase out West Acton, but that's not going to happen anytime soon, and then shore up the center, town center station. But so I assume that we'll be talking about this at our next meeting on the 22nd. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
Bob, anything else?
It probably isn't a budget item, but I believe Natural Resources said that there was a major review of the future for recreation and some of their plans and all of that. And when it's a ripe time, it would be nice for them to come in and tell us what they did envision and what the longer term implications for budgetary costs were. The same thing would be true of the library, except I don't think the library's long-range plan is going to be around anytime in the next few months, so that's something to for the next chairman to worry about.
Jeff?
I don't want to repeat what the good ideas that already came before me. I will say, though, that, John, I am a proponent of transportation, but I am not a proponent of saying, yeah, and it costs us some money, and we should just do it, and they shouldn't worry about being efficient, and we shouldn't care how much they charge. It should just be a token. They are a business, and it's all right to be a subsidized business. It's okay to lose money. I mean, the senior center loses money. I mean, we're spending money, and we're not charging the seniors for their use of the center, which is fine. I just believe that transparency says that we should know how much it is. As a committee, we should worry about if it doubles in ridership, is the amount of loss going to double? And therefore, we either put it in our budget, or we ask the question, can we somehow scale it so that as ridership increases, the percentage full of each ride increases, and therefore, sort of as a percentage, the loss will shrink. It's a business, it's a service as well, but transparent says that we should know what it costs, and as a town, then say, and it's worth it. We're damn glad that we have it, and be done with it. The only nit that I'd like to add, Mr. Chairman, is I laughed when I looked at your summary here, and it says that we only grew at 2.5%. And the reason it only grew at 2.5% is we reduced our debt by 9%. And there's an expression in finance, live by the sword, die by the sword. I know that if the debt doubled, everybody would say, oh, we're going to strike a subtotal before we count debt, because we don't want to show that we grew 20% or whatever. So I would highly recommend that any schedule like this have a subtotal of all funds we spend before debt, figure out what that percentage is, and then do the debt and then the grand total, because it's 3.2% without the debt.
That's what I said on Saturday, but I was told I was in the weeds.
Well, yeah, but you know, it's important. Whether it's excluded or not.
Time out. Chairman's going to talk. So for years, we excluded debt from all these schedules, and all we ever got was totally confused and couldn't reconcile our numbers. So it's in there, it's spelled out, it's transparent.
Okay, no, I didn't say take it out. I just said strike a subtotal before it, so that, you know, we'll be consistent 2 or 3 years from now when we add $100 million, or $60 million or $40 million to it, and we, you know, somehow then it will be a subtotal, I'm sure, before it. The only other thing I'm a little bit, I'll put it on the table anyway. I was a little bit hard on the West Acton Library, having a favorite expression that says, everybody wants to get to heaven, but nobody wants to die. And quite frankly, that seemed like low-hanging fruit to me. $80,000 for less, you know, $8 a book. The cost of maintaining a very old building, which we've talked about trying to use town resources for better purposes. And it would be a way to, you know, get out of something instead of continuing just adding N+ things to our slate of things that we fund. And I understand that may not, it would probably not be popular. Probably get 150 people at a town meeting who would vote against it being dropped from the budget. But in industry, we talk about zero-based budgeting, and if we get back to Mike's item of what could we do to stay flat in our revenue, we have to cut something in order to do that. And it would not be the first thing that I would vote for to bring back into the budget from zero-based budgeting.
Okay. Yes, Bob.
One last thought came to my mind going back to the North Acton Fire Station. I was looking at fire stations today, and our friends in Sudbury in October, a special town meeting, overwhelmingly, one negative vote, voted to go ahead with a $7.5 million fire station to replace the current fire station, which is on Route 20 in Sudbury, which will be impacted by the widening of the of Route 20 and is old, like some of our fire stations, and too small for modern equipment, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. In December, the override vote was voted down by, it got less than a majority vote, nowhere near probably the 2/3 it needed. And the complaints, whether these were the total complaints, but at least in the newspaper article, were that it cost too much money. Couldn't they have built it for less money? I think it's a lesson our friends and ourselves should keep in mind as we think of what's needed in North Acton. I mean, you can have a North Acton fire station that has a single engine. You can have a North Acton fire station that has 3 engines. You can have a variety of things in between. And unless it's carefully thought out, it may have the same problem. It's got to have an override vote as well as town meeting. I suspect it would get town meeting vote. Override is another matter.
True. All right. Brian, you got anything you want to add? Any information you're looking for from us? All right. Thank you all. I will try and get as many of these things answered, scheduled as I can. Next item on the agenda is the ALG is meeting on Thursday morning. It was postponed from last Thursday due to inclement weather. Thank God. And this is going to become a recurring item on our agendas as we try and make the ALG model work, which is, again, a consensus-driven group. So Jason and I, are you going to be there Thursday? Yes, I will. Okay. We'll be representing the FinCom on Thursday morning, and so the second thing I handed out was a bunch of numbers on a piece of paper. So this is not actually the ALG sheet we'll be looking at. What we'll be looking at is the box in the middle that's captioned ALG plan and shown on 1/4/2018 that covers FY17 through FY20. The history, I just unhid the columns and then I added 21, 22, and 23 is pretty much a straight extrapolation for the most part of what had been in the prior year's growth rates. I did add a line under net position, about a little more than halfway down the page. Net position for FY19 that is being shown is $1,134,000 in deficit. What I added was what it would be if our position on untaxed levy capacity was assumed, which basically is right now the model shows all of it, all 916,000 being taken in FY19, and what we said is spread it out over 3 years. So that would be the difference. So what Jason and I will be immediately pressed upon come Thursday morning is that exactly. So I want to hear what people have to say about, are we sticking with our views on untaxed levy capacity, or is there room for negotiation? The second item is whatever we decide on that, there's still going to be a gap, and what are your thoughts on closing the gap? What I did with FY21, 22, and 23 is simply, like I said, extrapolate the numbers, and then in FY23 I put in $3.8 million in additional debt service on the new school, and I threw in $500,000 in FY22 and $1 million in 23 on town capital projects. Those are 3.8 is an accurate number as we know it now. The others are just guesswork. And in FY '22, I put in how much of an operating override we would need to close the gap. So in '22, that would be $4,163,000, and in '23, it would be $5,871,000. Basically, the premise is by '22, '23, no matter what we assume for reserve replenishment, we'll be down to whatever replenishment we're generating. We won't have any existing reserves left. These are all basically just assumptions, but it does show that if all these assumptions come true, we'd have a tax rate of 2303 in FY '23, and our average single-family tax bill would have grown at a rate of 6.5% a year. As I said, what we'll be discussing in ALG probably on Thursday is FY '19. I did all the rest of this gyrations because we will have to put together a plan at least for FY '19, 20, 21 for town meeting. That's something we need to present. And we need a story to go with the numbers, whatever they wind up being. So first off, let's talk about untaxed levy capacity. Yes, Jeff?
May I back up just a second and ask, the municipal spending in 19 of 34,720?
Mm-hmm.
How does that relate to the 33,993 on Budget Saturday?
It's probably got its subsidies and capital and things like that. It's an all, what's in the ALG plan is usually an all-in number.
One's operating budget, the other one is total spending.
Right. Thank you.
Well, any volunteers on untaxed levy capacity?
Sure.
No, you're supposed to be guided. You're not supposed to be. Tom.
Well, I guess I'll start by displaying my, maybe a little bit of ignorance on this, but one question, does it really matter? This is money that we can either spend all this year, or we could spend a third, and a third, but at the end of the 3-year period, that's what we've got to spend, right? So it's either use it now or use it later. And I think, if my calculations are right, if we use the extra $600,000, it would add about $165 to the average tax bill, which again gets me to my question, does it really matter?
Well, it seems to matter to Mike. Like I said, it's a question of there's many ways to close this gap. Right now, the FY '19 number for reserve use is 1.3 million. I could see that easily going up to 2 million based on last year's or FY '17's turnbacks and replenishments. We have in the past said that we would be willing to use reserves for capital items. So there's a few $100,000 that we could say, that we would be willing to use or increase reserves for. We have said that maybe we want to take that Minuteman capital charge and use reserves for 1 year and then maybe bond it in the future. So there's lots of ways to close the gap. The question is, what's the committee's pleasure? What's the guidance? Christie?
I still don't really understand along the lines of what Tom was saying of the importance, that's not the right word, what we get out of using it, reserves versus untaxed levy capacity.
Okay, sure.
In a given situation.
If we chose to replace $600,000 with of untaxed, make it simple. If there's $916,000 of untaxed levy capacity and we choose to use it this year, your taxes will go up. If we chose instead to use $900,000 more in reserves, your taxes would not go up.
Okay. It's kind of like we're paying it out of our savings account of the reserves.
They're both essentially one-time money that's not coming back.
Yes, and I, as a taxpayer, would rather pay for it out of savings than not. But I don't think most people would understand it that way. I wouldn't know, reading my tax bill, that suddenly my taxes had gone up differently than they would have either. I just see, oh, my tax bill's higher.
I mean, you would have seen that the rate went up more than 2.5%, that it went up more like 3.5%, if you look that close. Roland.
I would like to see, like, have it stick to, we decided using it over 3 years. So in tax levy capacity.
Okay.
If we end up going that route. And I would like to see things like, yeah, I think that's, and and the excess in reserves to be used for the one-time capital items that we've been harping on for a while. How to close the gap. I don't really have another thought of it at this point. See, we're in the budget where they can trim back a little bit, and that'll help, but.
Okay, Bob.
If memory serves me correctly, there's roughly $900,000 worth of capital to do the HVAC systems for Station 2 and Station 3. If we said that's $900,000 out of reserves for capital items, that would be very useful. That would reduce the charges against the enterprise fund, which would allow them to cover the cost, to eliminate the subsidy, which the town manager already has in there, as well as to pay a greater percentage of the cost of the actual individuals who provide the service. So that's where I would start on Thursday. Is we would pony up an extra $900,000 to do that, with the expectation that the town would follow in the 2 steps that I indicated.
Fire station HVAC improvements, I think are listed at $400,000, and it's listed to be bonded. Am I correct on that? Okay. So still, it wouldn't have the impact in FY19 because you're only assuming what, first year's interest? Really? Okay.
Perspective, this last issuance that we did, that $1 million ban, that was about 1.25%. Now our analysts are saying you start budgeting about 3.25%.
Ooh. All right, other comments? Mike, what do you think?
Well, I see some combination of using reserves and maybe investigating the tax levy. I would even throw in cutting the operating budget by 0.5% across the board. If push came to shove, spread the pain.
All right, well, anything I mentioned in the past was not going to get us all the way there, I can assure you. Jason, what do you think? Oh, Jeff?
Let me ask a question. If we should ever need an override, and we go to town meeting, and let's say the override was really critical, like town hall's roof blew off, or other things, and town meeting said no, because 58 people came who decided they didn't want to vote for it, and you don't get it. Could you, if you have the unused excess of 2.5, still do what you have to do because you wouldn't need town meeting's approval at that point on some of those things. I'm talking about an override as opposed to the majority to pass a.
No, you can't appropriate money without town meeting vote.
No, but what I'm trying to get to is maybe you have a majority, but you don't have a 2/3. All I'm suggesting is there a reason to keep some of that uncharged taxes in reserve? It's almost like a savings account in terms of giving you some flexibility down the road.
It would be quicker in an emergency to tap reserves than untaxed levy capacity, I would think. You know, you could just call a special town meeting.
Right, but we may not have all that luxury. I'm just wondering if it's like, so reserves would obviously be the number one thing you'd want in the back pocket. But if now you're saying, you know, should we deplete entirely our ability to use that tool in our toolkit versus biting the bullet and going to town and getting an override, you wonder whether there's any benefit of having a little bit of money in that arrow in your quiver.
Okay, Jason.
So what I would look at is, it was $400,000 for the Kelly's Corner Street investigation?
Again, it's a bonded item, so it doesn't have the impact in FY19.
Okay. Still $400,000 that we might not need to spend. So I was going to go with $400,000 for that, $700,000 from reserves to make it the $2 million that we've been using in years past. That gets us up to 1.1. We still have to squeeze some money out somewhere. I'm sure that Brian's car excise tax is off by a little bit, because he and I go back and forth on that one, so I think there's money there as he's being conservative. It doesn't get us all the way there, but it saves us from having to hit the taxpayer with the entire amount of the untaxed levy capacity at once. And again, we're going to be coming back and asking for an override in the next year or two, well, not this coming year, but within 2 years. Now's not the time to be taxing every last dollar that we possibly can. I would much rather see it come out of reserves than untaxed levy capacity. I definitely don't want to go all the untaxed levy capacity to go at the same time, and there has to be savings in here somewhere.
All right, so what about the Minuteman capital thing? Should we tap reserves for 1 year and then, I mean, I think our thought process was we'd ride it out 1 year and then consider bonding it.
I like that.
That's reasonable.
So, all right, now we get down to expense. Is somebody rolling?
I agree with the Minuteman, ride out for 1 year and then see what it is at that point.
So now we get down to expenses. Frankly, I have a hard time. I will come back and nitpick, and probably more nitpick some of the town budgets, but since they were in compliance with our point of view, I have a hard time asking, for them to give this time around.
That's why you paid the big bucks.
So that leaves us the schools who clearly are not in compliance. 1%, we basically told them 3% on operating, 4% on assessment. They came in 4% on operating, just about 5% on assessment. Obviously, 1% of the assessment is $600,000, which would go a long way to making the problem go away. Do we want to make that something that we put on the table on Thursday? Yes, Bob.
I guess the simple answer is yes. You want to put something like that on the table. The absolute dollar increase for 18-19 versus 17-18 for the schools is $600,000. admittedly, all the students who are supposedly disappearing from our system are not disappearing rapidly, but they're certainly not increasing.
Not rapidly enough,
It's
apparently.
not increasing, at least for next year. And so I see no reason why they couldn't get $600,000 out of that. And I think you should try and get something like $200,000 out of the town, because once they start settling those contracts, they're going to come back and ask for money, and if that's a special town meeting in September or October, it can only come out of reserves. And I don't want to relate to you the terrible problems I once had with regard to having money in a budget for settlements that was not clearly delineated, but it does no good to pretend that they don't exist, and therefore you have a budget in which you make no provision for it.
So that is a good point, that there will be raises that come due, because the contracts are pretty much all expiring at the end of, except for the firefighters, at the end of this fiscal year. So 19 will be impacted. It may be impacted retroactively, but it will be impacted. Other comments, other guidance?
Steve?
John?
On your projection here, you push the override out till FY '22,
Yeah.
and you're
By basically consuming all of our reserves, yeah.
what was the with our use of town reserves, it had been at just under $2.5 million for 17 and 18. How did it drop to 1.3?
That's the number, for 19, that's the number that's in the plan. I fully expect it's coming up.
Back up to
Yeah.
about 2.5?
Yeah. So, two and maybe 2.2 or something like, it's coming up. It's not.
How did the schools account for their emergency and deficiency account rising from about 2.9 million to 4.1 million?
I could only give you my opinion, and my opinion is that in the years when their budget increases were more modest, they had no increase in E&D, or maybe a use of E&D. When they started hitting up our assessments at an average of 5% a year, all of a sudden they had money to put into E&D. So I'd rather have a lower assessment and less E&D.
Was it on account of a turnback, more turnback than usual?
The turnbacks generally average 1% on both sides.
Okay.
So that tends to count, in total turnbacks down in schools, that tends to say you're going to get $1 million turnback each year. Beyond that, there are always one time, or a string of one-time unique revenue events, which are difficult to predict, which is why we always kind of stuck a number.
Or Chapter 70 being overly conservative at the beginning of the year.
Okay.
Sometimes there's, I think there was a Medicare or something reimbursement for the schools this time around. I mean, it's always something. There always is something. I'm not totally uncomfortable with the $2 million replenishment number. I will say it probably won't happen in FY19 simply because on the school side, they're already talking about using money for the feasibility study for the schools. That's a use, and they're talking about using $700,000 in E&D for the change in the transportation, and that's not coming back either. So I don't think you'll see it in FY19.
Okay.
But I have no problem assuming that we'll get $2 million back for FY18. So, Jeff,
Didn't you say that either they're capped or there was some goal?
They are capped at 5% of their
Is it
spending.
5% of what? 80 million?
Total spending. Yeah, 80
Totals
million.
About 80 million. So 4 is about the most.
They're getting there.
Yeah, I was just, thought I heard that.
I wouldn't worry about them hitting the cap anytime soon with the one and change that was pulled out for the feasibility and the 700 for the busing. I mean, that's $2 million round numbers.
And strategically, they may want it higher for bonding, because they're gonna, I think, bond a little bit.
I would, but roll it.
I'm showing from the worksheet, from FY '18 to FY '19, that the increase is, on the schools, is $2,823,092. I think they could easily lose 92 bucks, which wouldn't hurt them. But 2.8 million.
Yeah, that's twice as much, well, it's 1.5 as much as we can raise with a 2.5%.
Yeah, so the question, that's why the 800,000 threw me off, whatever the figure said earlier. So if they have a $2.8 million increase, I guess we got to see what's driving that. And there's got to be some ways they can cut. Well, I guess it's 2.8 million, so that's a good chunk of cash.
This year, a lot of it's driven by they have settled their union contract, when it was a 4%, so yeah, what's driving them is mostly compensation. And we'll get into their budget in more detail. I guess they'll be pointing out the details. Are they meeting this Thursday?
Yeah.
So there may be more details in the budget, or maybe not.
And budget Saturday for the schools is?
26, 27, whatever the Saturday is. We'll certainly have them in advance of that. Same procedure, by the way. When we get the details, get your questions to me and I'll forward them on. They're adding some positions, they are deleting some positions, but there was a net increase, I think, of about $400,000 in new people as well. But on the other hand, there's almost no increase in health insurance this year, so that doesn't happen.
Did they budget an increase in health insurance?
No, they budget pretty flat, I think. And there's not much of an increase in sped, which often drives their costs up. So it's almost all being driven by personnel and compensation-related costs. That said, if you want to talk about a 1% cut, it's there because almost every year they'll underrun by 1%. But that leaves them pretty close to the vest, trying to manage a bottom line budget. Yes, Christy.
Even with, I'm sorry, I'm having a rough day. If they had just level funding, if it was the same budget as last year, what would the percentage have changed for Acton with the switch in allocation between, the change in allocation between Acton and Boxborough as part of the regionalization?
I'm gonna say there's maybe a $300,000 or $400,000 swing, but I'd have to go back and look at the regional agreement to get the exact number. Yes.
Speaking of the regional agreement, aren't we about coming to the end of life to the regional agreement, which is also an opportunity to reevaluate the allocation between Boxborough and Acton and who gets what based on, 5 years of history to see if it's fair, unfair, make sense, don't make sense?
Bob, do you have any recollection of if it was is there a renegotiation period in the regional agreement? I know the shift between Acton and Boxborough is phasing out, but I didn't know that there was a possibility of having it reopening the negotiations.
Well,
Just asking.
it takes two sides to reopen. And so I think there may be a year in there for the possibility of rediscussing it, but you're now down with all the special incentives that Acton got to sign on to this going away. You're basically down to the per pupil count. And It's hard for me to see that either Boxborough or Acton would particularly want to change from the per pupil count. And indeed, if they build all those apartments they keep talking about in Boxborough, it may very well be that their percentage will actually rise, and the $340,000 that may shift one way this year will shift back. Certainly over the course of the original agreement, when it was just 7 through 12, there were times when one town percentages grew and other towns' percentages fell, and then it reversed itself.
I remember those days, Bob. It just haven't been happening on our side very often lately. Right. All right, so what I'm hearing is we're not totally committed to maintaining the one-third on unused levy capacity. We are willing to use some reserves up to a point, but we'd want to see some cuts in spending along the lines that Bob mentioned, if we're going to do anything, if we're going to move off our position at all. Am I hearing it correctly?
You heard it more. You heard more willingness to use the untaxed levy capacity than I did.
Okay. Then I would like you to put together a question right now so we can take a straw vote so that you and I are on the same page.
But Jason, the chairman's ears are always more sharp and acute than any other member of the committee.
Well, given he's the vice chairman, we'll allow him this one.
So if the committee would be so kind as to, on a straw poll approach, say whether they're looking for one-third, or use it all now, and on a scale of 1 to 10, the conviction behind that use would be much appreciated.
It's a two-part straw poll.
Jeff, if I could start with you, please.
I get the feeling there's a strategy here. I keep thinking there is one that I don't understand. From our perspective, in both presentation to the public and general use of the reserves, which I think we have a little more control over, in which way, where the money should come from. And like I said, I'm not having a great day, so I haven't been able to figure out what that is. But do we have a general overall idea of which is better for us to use long-term versus short-term? Or we do know that we have the overrides coming. Which one of those plays to putting us in a better position relative to the taxpayers either getting the overrides that we're going to need or not? Other areas we should be thinking about that I'm just not coming up with right now?
I feel you're on the right path, and we're just trying to decide whether to, knowing that we have a shortfall, a projected shortfall, how are we going to plug it? And it sounds like what I've heard, and since Steve and I need to be in agreement on this, what I've heard is that we definitely there is support within the committee for using more of the reserves. We're trying to get a clear opinion on whether or not there is support on using all or only a third of the untaxed levy capacity. And when both of those when we hit those two numbers, what's left then becomes, what are we going to go back to the two entities and say is the amount of expenditure that they need to scale back to make the entire shortfall go away? Does that make sense?
That makes sense as a newbie to this and not having as much of an understanding of the long view. I'd love someone to explain the strategy of using one versus the other as they understand it.
My personal strategy is I don't want to use the untaxed levy capacity because I do not want to raise the taxes any more than we absolutely have to this close to going for an override. We already have reserves in hand. We do not need to ask the taxpayers for any more money to expend the money in the reserves. Spending the money on the untaxed levy capacity has a direct and immediate impact on the very next tax bill they will receive. So I'm trying to avoid taking more money now from the untaxed levy capacity. I'm treating it as a secondary reserve that I want to not touch as long as we possibly can, because I do not want to raise taxes at this time. I realize the money all needs to be spent. I realize we're not looking to cut services any more than we absolutely have to, if we even have to. But I would rather we spend the money in reserves, decide not to spend on things that may or may not absolutely have to be done, and then only as a last gasp do I want to raise the taxes via the untaxed levy capacity. That is my personal approach to it.
Sorry. Would the untaxed levy capacity then limit the necessity for the override, just rather than, would it be put in at that same time that the override would happen, in your view?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, you wouldn't leave anything on the table when you're going for an override.
Yes, so that the amount that we actually have to override is incrementally less. It's 600, 300 less, depending on when we do it. But yes, it's all going to come out eventually. I just want to hold off as long as possible.
Yeah, I mean, I understood that part. I'm good on that part. What's the argument for the other side of spending it all now? You're asking, should we do the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, or should we spend all the untaxed levy capacity now? Does anybody want to speak to that?
I'll try as a newbie, because what I was going to say in my answer is that ordinarily I would say put as much on the untaxed levy as we've got, because what we're really funding here is an operating deficit, and we ought to be transparent about what we're spending on it and not taking it out of a savings account. If this is what we want to spend, we ought to tax ourselves and spend it. And we can recommend, but at the end of the day, it's the townspeople who are going to vote. And I think John said it, a month or so ago, that's why people move to Acton. They like the school system. We are a community, and at the end of the day, people will be willing to spend for it or not. But Jason, you make a very compelling argument, I think, just given the timing of where we are. So given that, I actually am in your camp that spend as little as possible from the untaxed levy. We've got the reserves. There's a good chance that they will be replenished with turnbacks and with additional revenue. But it's a dangerous game where we're spending that down to, a pretty low number if we don't get add backs.
For guidance for Thursday, you're saying 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and on a level of 1 to 10, where would you fall on your conviction?
I'll stay with the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3.
Level of 1 to 10 on your conviction?
3.
3. Okay, good. Thank you.
1/3.
Which is
I guess the other
good number and one bad number?
As far as the two budgets that we're looking at, I think the town has done a great job and a fair job coming in where we asked them to come in. So I personally wouldn't push them for any cutback. The school, if my math is right, is looking for 4.9% in 19 and 5.7% in 20. I mean, I understand they just signed a contract and that the bulk of the spending is salaries, but you can't do that in a vacuum. So I think I would certainly put that on the table Thursday.
Thank you. Christy? And this is a straw poll. You're welcome to pass. You're welcome to pass. Christine?
I'm with the 1/3 group, and I'm a 10. I feel like that's the way to go, if we can't fund it otherwise.
Thank you. Roland?
Same.
Mike? Yeah, I support the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. It seems to make sense.
And on a scale of 1 to 10, willing to come off of that position with thumb screws down on the table?
Maybe a scale of 0 to 10. I have a low threshold for pain.
Okay, thank you. John?
Yeah, I would join the other colleagues and the one-third, and, you know, don't go to the wall on that. I think there's probably going to have to be some giving, so the conviction is what about 3, Tom? 3.2.
Whether it was Steve's accurate hearing or not, I liked his proposal.
I'll learn my lesson, Bob, I'm sorry. Jeff?
I guess I come back to what is the reserve? It's not a savings account. It's not an emergency account. It's the cumulative over-collection of taxes beyond what we spent. So if you take that definition, it's already been collected for operations, and it's sitting there to help not have to double tax, if you will, people, and that the other taxing is we could have charged you more, but we didn't. And if we had charged you more, we would just have this bigger reserve, and then we would hopefully use the reserve. There's a lot of talk in town meeting about, you know, using that reserve because it's our money that we've already raised and it should be for operations. And the converse is it's an emergency fund, you know, but we never really added an extra buck value, you know, tax rate for emergencies to put in some bank somewhere. We're not allowed to do that as far as I know, right? We're not allowed, I mean, we couldn't assess an extra dollar just to build a reserve fund.
No, you have to stay within the levy.
Right, and so, you know, given that argument, I'm kind of leaning more towards use the reserve, but I'm prudent enough to say I wouldn't use it all because it's just not smart, you know. So if we need to use a third of our taxing, you know, to next year and still maintain a kind of a reasonable reserve, not as high as it was many years ago, and not too low, then I'd be okay with a third. But if we find the turnback is so big that and it wasn't, right?
Okay.
What's the reserve right now?
You can appropriate money for reserves. You can't necessarily do it by calling it reserves, but years ago, the town and school budgets both had large contingency accounts. There are hidden contingencies in the accounts that we do every year because they budget for 100% of rain falling, knowing that only 70% of the rain is going to come. A large share of the reserves come from protection against a tiny liability against having to replace a trashed electricity building on the North Shore that never came to pass. And so the reserves come from far more than just overtaxing.
Understood. Thank you. So, Bob, I apologize for having overstepped my bounds, and Mr. Chairman, I will be more quiet next time and defer to your ears. Thank you all for your feedback.
Your time will come.
1 to 10, how would you?
I'm hearing a blended 6-7 using 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, and there's got to be a solid reason to move us off of that. That's what I'm hearing.
All right. Thank you all. I think we're guided sufficiently to get through Thursday. Committee reports. Who wants to go first? Committee reports. Go ahead.
So the Chinese Trail and Garden project that was submitted.
What?
It was a Chinese Trail and Garden project for Acton Arboretum that was submitted to CPC has been pulled. So that was,
Could I ask you to, for the next time, maybe give us just a list of
I
what?
gave it to you last time. I'll give it to you right now.
Okay.
Regional Housing Services 2-year support, which Nancy Tavernier will be able to speak about when she comes from ACHC. Memorial Library, they have some Arthur Davis etchings restoration. Then the Howard Gallery will be doing the framing for that. I think that's 70, I can't see, I think it's $12,000 for that. Woodlawn Cemetery gates restoration, $33,000. The Acton Arboretum China Trail and Garden, which was $14,000, has been pulled. Camp Acton to make a handicapped accessible campsite for $10,000. There's a lot of leverage on that one. Kennedy Building at Woodlawn Cemetery, they are looking to do some, they're calling it restoration. I kind of question that for, I think it has 51,000, but it might only be 5. I can't really read my writing on that one. They need to make it handicapped accessible. It's kind of a depressing building from what I understand on the inside. They need to renovate the interior to make it more
Cemetery.
Kind of what I thought, but when people are going in time of mourning. And you can buy a cemetery lot for $1,000 if anybody was interested. That's what they're going for.
I'm hopefully not in the market.
Park and dam removal study for River Street at $53,875. Because we need another study because we don't know what they're going to do with the piece of property that they bought again. As we found out on Saturday, they don't know when they're ever going to, hopefully the study will come to some kind of conclusion so they will be able to then go back to CPC to get the money back from CPC for that property, or at least a portion of that. A skate park expansion for $76,000. Foxborough CPA committing $20,000. Narrow Park variable message sign and portable stage access ramp. Open space, $450,000. Old North Acton School at 62 Harris Street that was built in 1839. Is that some kind of project with that? Hosmer House grounds, $188,000. They have 3 acres of land there, which doesn't seem like it does, but it does, I guess. Acton Housing Authority, $75,000 to create housing and services for the disabled, for seniors and disabled. Acton Housing Authority, another $75,000 for a Sachem Way for decking and siding project. Acton Housing Authority restoration of historic property, $38,300, and $16,000 Habitat for Humanity. And another Habitat for Humanity project, $53,000, and then 5% for administration.
So how are they coming on their deliberations, or?
They're still hearing from applicants.
Really?
And this Thursday has one of, I think it's the last one, will be meeting this, they have the meeting this Thursday.
When do you think they'll be ready to?
Start deliberating?
Yeah.
I don't know if they have it this Thursday in the following meeting, but they're gonna be pretty soon. They have more requests than what they have money for,
Yep.
again, as it's been common in the last couple of years. They also got a $75,000 turn back for a project that never commenced for the I think it was 75 grand, for the basketball court out here at Gower Playground, right next to behind the library. And that was supposed to be ready to go, and they never did anything with it, and the money came back. And I know the chair of the CPC was not happy because he felt that that money could have been used for other things that year, that they had turned down requests, and they funded that. And if it was a town project, we would have thought that would have been ready to go.
Okay. Well, as soon as they've reached some conclusions, we need to hear from them.
Yep, I will let the chairman know.
Okay.
And do you have any dates you would like to have them in by? End of February?
End of February.
Okay.
School committee?
Yep, school committee met on the December 14th, and they finalized the new start times. So we will go down to 2-tier busing, and 30-minute later start time for the junior high, 44 for the high school, elementary to follow, and they are planning to pay $570,000 out of their reserves for the initial cost of the 2-tier busing and $180,000 of their operating. And then the following year absorb $192,000 into the operating, and that'll cover everything that's not reimbursed by the state. They also voted to move all of the before and after school care to ComEd, and ComEd will now run every program with every school, and the ComEd program will pay for the utilities cost of using the facilities during that time, and then the school will take the money that they're not spending on that utilities budget and use that to fund their new assistant teacher in every classroom project. So they're just moving that money. And then they did a preliminary budget report, but we'll all get into details on that in a couple weeks.
Jason?
If I could add, the preliminary budget is the addendum to the last meeting. So if you go to the school committee page, the January 11th meeting, if you click on the link for addendum, that's where you find the preliminary budget from the school, from the school committee.
How are they doing on their superintendent hunt? I'm sorry. How are they doing on their superintendent search?
So they were still collecting members for their superintendent search. They have 3 of the, Amy, Diane, and Tessa are going to be on the superintendent search. They've released a press release to solicit members of all different bodies to join that search.
It's interesting that Lexington has gotten down to 3 finalists. They started in October. They had their national search of about, I think they got 25 applicants. They interviewed 12, and one of the 3 finalists is Glenn Brand.
They are planning on having the list of candidates to refer to the school committee by February 12th.
Okay. Any other committee reports? Mike?
Structural steel is going hot and heavy, despite the frigid cold at Minuteman. It's starting to look like a school.
Right.
We'll have a better forecast next week.
John?
Yeah, our 2 reports. The town manager search committee, our ad went in on, I think it was January 2nd, to the various municipal magazines and web services. And those are due the beginning of, the applications are due the beginning of February. We are meeting next week. The Kelly's Corner Committee met early this morning. Steve, do we have plans to have Andy Brockway come visit with us?
I had offered him dates. He's never gotten back to me. I was going to follow up with him and pin him down to one date, one of our February meetings.
Okay, yeah, I think it's important because we are moving along where I think Peter Berry, Janet, is going to take back to you a proposal for a late fall, October, November town meeting with the zoning bylaw for mixed use at Kelly's Corner. We wanted it out there so our infrastructure studies can be completed, and that's set to go. And Adam Winstanley can refine his proposed development plan for the Kmart parcel, so it could really all come together. So in voting on the bylaw, the town meeting could see, well, okay, we've got infrastructure going, and here's what that particular parcel is going to look like. Interesting with developers now, they're not particularly interested in a retail space. It's more in, rental units and mixed use. Well, yeah, they call it mixed use, but it's heavier on, on rental properties, and we're asking him to go back and bring it a little more classy. I see you're having a hard time.
I hated it last time. I'm not going to like it any better this time.
Okay.
Okay. But as I've pointed out in the past, this is a committee report. Do not shoot the messenger.
Well, except, are you familiar with the latest that he was going to have is 50% one bedroom, 50% two? So that is certainly towards a less expansive student population. I just throw it out there. That was what at the not this meeting, but before it, that's what he said. And because I grilled him on that particular thing, and but he was interested in putting a bunch of like restaurants and professional offices and those kinds of things, as opposed to retail. I don't know what the latest version is.
It was two-story, what he would call commercial, with retail on the first floor, kind of non-chain type restaurants, and then professional space on the second floor, physicians' offices, stuff like that. Committee this morning in the discussion was looking for more commercial in the plan, and perhaps toning down some of the residential, but you know, the developers these days are tipping residential.
There were three plans proposed. First plan was 128 units of housing. The second plan is 148 units, and the third plan, which I assumed incorporating the Bersol oil property, that section up there, they could get up to then 158 units. Again, as Jeff said, it's 50% two-bedroom of the housing units, 50% one-bedroom, and then the commercial place would just be along the Route 27 corridor.
All right, thank you. Any other committee reports? Okay, point of view outreach. Jason, you wanted to bring us up to date?
First, I would like to apologize to Christine and Steve for sending them out to a meeting that I had not properly confirmed, so my apologies for that. Everything has been reconfirmed at this point to make sure that I don't make that mistake twice and inconvenience people.
Oh, you wouldn't make that mistake twice.
That did uncover that the high school date had changed. It's now the 17th. I unfortunately am going to be out of town on the 17th. Tom is still good to cover it. Thank you, Tom. Is there anybody else who is free on the 17th at 7 p.m. to be at the high school to accompany Tom?
I'll go with 17th. I'm retired now, so there's more free time.
Okay. You can take it, John, but you're doing a whole bunch of them. You've done a whole bunch of them.
I think we have a meeting on the 17th. Yeah.
Okay, John might not be free.
If I don't know swimming that night, I'll do it. But I think I do. I think I'm.
Can you get back to me tomorrow?
I can get back to you late.
That's fine. So we'll pencil Roland in for now.
What date is that?
The 17th is
I know it's a Wednesday. It's
a week from tomorrow. Okay. Other than that,
a week from tomorrow at
7 p.m. at the high school.
So it's high school PTSO.
Yep. Other than that, the email that I sent out earlier has now been confirmed on the other side, not just on the FinCom side too. So again, my apologies.
All right. Is there any other business that needs to come before the committee tonight? All right, then I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Second?
Second.
We're adjourned.
Next meeting is